Hey y'all, it's April 2nd. I just got over the flu and I have a pimple on my nose, which means it's the perfect time to talk about what I watched in March. We're gonna start with the TV shows, then we're gonna do the 2 movies, and then the 1 book. The show I watched the most recently and also the most infrequently throughout the month was Abbott Elementary. There have been so many times this season that episodes have made it into the news, and I have avoided it at all costs because I don't want to spoil it, but I'm still so behind. I'm not even finished with the 2nd season yet, although I think I only have like 1 or 2 more episodes. I love this show. It's comedically bright, and even when you watch an episode, like I just watched Educator of the Year, which is towards the end of the 2nd season, it feels like a slower episode, when it doesn't feel as consequential. It will just hit you with a line from a character, and this line was, "You don't get to choose when people acknowledge you," that is just so well written, comes from the right character after the right set of circumstances have, and it reminds me of what I can only imagine watching early episodes of like Parks and Rec or The Office or like any of the shows that have now become like sitcom history or shows that people like love to binge when they hit a new streaming service. It just has this homey feeling to it, and I really enjoy the show. I've then been watching Shogun, which I am actually trying to finish this episode before the newest episode of Shogun comes out. FX has put some massive marketing behind this, but I feel like even though I saw so many of these commercials, I literally did not give it a shot until I heard from a friend that it was a really good show and one perfect for Game of Thrones fans or people who really love a show with good political intrigue. Shogun is set in the 1600s in Japan and follows 5 leaders of this, let's say like the board of the country. It has a name, but I can't remember what it is. These 5 people, along with the Taiko, who is like the ruler of all of Japan, are supposed to democratically kind of vote on things and keep everyone at peace. But the last Taiko, who was created this era of peace, has since passed, and his heir has not yet come of age. And so all of the board of leaders begins to infight and scheme, and they begin to throw one another out of the board and kind of start to plot to go to war against one another. But nobody wants to really make the first move. What's really great about the show is it takes place mostly in Japanese. So you really do have to sit there and pay attention and read these subtitles and take everything in. And you might be saying, okay, so it's basically a Japanese show. Here's the catch, though. It's set in the 1600s. At this point in time in Japan, the Portuguese were using Japan as a trading route and a place for trade, as well as a way to evangelize and kind of take over a new portion of the world. So they're trying to convert the Japanese to Catholicism, as well as use the Japanese natural resources to ship back and sell in the Western world. At the same time, in the Western world, Portugal and England are at war with each other, and the first episode of Shogun opens with a English group of sailors who land in Japan and are the first Englishmen to set foot on the country, and thus sparks a series of events that kind of bring these 3 groups together. And there are alliances that are formed between some of the Japanese rulers and the Portuguese, some between the Japanese rulers and the Englishmen, and kind of how they all intersect, as well as this really interesting notion that there are Japanese citizens and important characters in the show who have been converted to Catholicism, so they do speak Portuguese, so they can interact with the Englishman who speaks Portuguese. So it's so well done and so interesting. The dynamics between the characters are so fascinating, and we're dealing with top tier talent here. My absolute favorite character is Mariko. Such a strong female lead, and not a strong female lead like, oh, she's kicking ass, like she's in here like ready to go, but she is a character who is defined by her femininity and where she fits in society, but the way that she is able to use that role to make change and live out her own life and what she wants for her life, while also working within the system of trying to support not only her religion, but her ruling family. Oh, it's so good. I can't stress you enough how good this show is. The next show I'll be brief about, because I have spoken about it before and I dearly love it, is The Bear. So I had watched The Bear last year, but I rewatched it. I got my husband to watch it. I've been wanting him to watch it for a while. And midway through watching it, he had said, "I'm really glad like you showed this to me because you've talked about it for a while. I think it's probably one of your favorite shows." The Bear really is probably one of my favorite shows. One of the episodes of season 2 is my all-time favorite episode of TV that I watched last year, and I also binged all of Succession that year, so like that's saying something. It's a show that I feel is so perfectly post-pandemic, and it is clearly written with a lot of the sentiments and complications and joys of living in this time period that we do. If I could sell you the bear in one pitch, it would be that there are people who, despite being broken, despite coming from hard places in life, all want to make a singular thing in their life better. And through trying to make this thing better, they not only become better people, but they find their purpose, second chances at life, as well as genuinely just improve the atmosphere. And this show, despite I think a lot of people stressing the emphasis that the show takes on mental health and mental illness, the comedy in this show is so rich. It's so good. The beauty of the show too is that a character that feels to only exist for comedic relief or to create plot complications in like early parts of season 1, by the end of season 2 has individual episodes that grow them as a character, that make them richer. They go through these deep evolutions, and that's something that I think a lot of shows are scared to do. And this one does it all so well. Also, it's swept at like the Emmys and the Golden Globes. So like, I don't know what you're doing if you're not watching The Bear. No offense to you, but that's kind of a dumb choice, don't you think? Next one, very brief. I watched Dynasty, the New England Patriots. I was a big fan of the Last Dance docuseries when that came out early 2020. The Dynasty seemed to kind of have the same promise, like this recent football dynasty where not only the greatest player of all time, but the greatest coach of all time kind of came out of. Also, a lot of scandals, some of which I remember happening and some of which I had completely no idea about. This show promised to kind of get into all of that, delve into it, and really see like what does it take to be a modern 21st century dynasty in sports. And while I think a lot of the episodes are very interesting, if you're not familiar with Tom Brady's like beginnings in the NFL, whether you love him or hate him, this documentary does a good job of kind of showing his duality in sports, wherein he's been praised and put on a pedestal, when he's kind of been hated, and also like just what he's added to the sport. This documentary is extremely biased against Bill Belichick and probably pro Robert Kraft, because there are some scandals that happened in like very recent years that don't seem to be covered by this documentary. Like, this documentary kind of makes the statement that in the 2017 season, Bill Belichick and Tom Brady's relationship was in such a bad place that it was inevitable that the Patriots were going to like fall apart. But they go on to win the Super Bowl at least one more time before Tom Brady loses, and the documentary kind of just skips over that and ends. So it feels a little bit unfinished and abrupt to me, as well as extremely biased, because even though I will say Bill Belichick doesn't do anything to defend himself in his like on-camera interviews for this, there's a lot there that the documentary really just points to him as a bad guy, which is typical of sports documentaries. That really makes sense, and I think a lot of people have come to that same conclusion, but I think it's yet to be determined, since it's so recent that the New England Patriots dynasty has kind of fallen apart, to look back and blame only one party, because that one party is also extremely crucial into it becoming a dynasty. So maybe there's more to glean from this in like analysis than there is in actually watching it, but I can't tell you how many times I actually gasped, and my husband was like, that's embarrassing that you didn't know this has happened, because this literally has happened in like the last 10 years. But it's entertaining if you want to know a little bit more about the sports world. And then the last TV show I watched this month was also a docuseries. It's definitely the heaviest on this list, so definitely know what you're getting into with the Quiet on Set documentary. Obviously, the revelations of this documentary are abhorrent, and I think the only takeaway that you can have from this is that people at Nickelodeon at the time did not take the best interests of the clearly vulnerable children and parents of those children, and they did not put into place legal or unionize or any type of guidelines to really make sure the best was happening for these kids. And it's hard to really point blame onto anyone in these situations other than the companies themselves, who clearly to some level had to be knowledgeable of these events and had to be letting certain things slide, as well as the perpetrators themselves. There are clearly people who have done criminal acts and have gotten away with certain things, have faced minuscule slaps on the wrist for their, again, abhorrent crimes against children. And so again, I don't want to go into detail about that. It's all in the docuseries if you want to explore it. And I think it's really important for anyone who's about my age, like your 20s, who grew up watching this stuff on Nickelodeon. There's so much to discuss in this, and you probably can read it all online if you're not comfortable diving into it. I don't think it's the best done docuseries, but I think the information makes it worth watching, if that makes sense. Moving on to the two movies I watched this month. The Proposal, which I have seen before and dearly, dearly beloved. I've watched The Proposal before and I love it very dearly. That's what I was trying to say. It's one of my favorite movies ever. I think Sandra Bullock and Ryan Reynolds' comedy mixed with their chemistry in this film is really great. And I think the entire like build of the family, from Craig T. Nelson to Betty White is just so good in this little town of Alaska. Like, it feels like something that could happen in a book, like a rom-com book, but I feel like it's so perfect on screen because of all those comedy elements that I just love this movie so much, and I'll never not give it 5 stars on Letterboxd. Don't ever think you'll catch me rating one of my favorite rom-coms less than 5 stars on Letterboxd. It just won't happen, okay? It won't. It won't. You can point out things that are imperfect to me, and I will turn a blind eye to them. I watched another movie, which is definitely not a 5-star movie for me personally, which is a little bit of a controversial take, and that's Poor Things. I watched it because there was a good chance that Emma Stone was going to win, and it was one of the only movies that I kind of wanted to watch of the Best Picture nominees that I hadn't yet seen. For Poor Things, I'm glad I watched it for Emma Stone's performance, but that's about all I'm glad about. It was my first Yorgos Lanthimos film, and I did know that it was going to be weird, but I feel like this film is so long and dragged out for kind of no reason, and I feel that it was visually overwhelming to me. I think it's really impressive. There were some parts that were really beautiful, but I think for the most part, I felt kind of like it was a cacophony of things, which I think is probably important for the movie to show how life has all of these different elements and things that are beautiful and ugly and weird and different and new and exciting, and that's what Poor Things explores through Bella Baxter's eyes. I just didn't care that much. I simply didn't care. And I feel like that's really controversial. I think other than Emma Stone's clearly inspired performance here, I don't know that I have much else to say about it. I just didn't really love it. And to be completely honest, all of its themes of life and what it means to be a human, I felt were better expressed in Barbie. And you can sue me for that. I don't know. You're more than welcome to roast me on that opinion in the comments. Absolutely. But it just wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. The book I read this month was Wildfire, which I gave 3 stars on Goodreads, but I kind of feel like it's more like a 2.5 because like I kind of enjoyed some of it, but it wasn't that great. It was the sequel to Icebreaker. If you're aware of Icebreaker, it took the Kindle Unlimited world by storm. Miss Hannah Grace, I do think there were several lines in your book that I underlined, I highlighted, and I tagged because I thought they were very beautiful and they struck me. However, why did this book have no consequences? They were supposed to not be dating at this camp, and since it's a romance book, I bet you can figure out what happens at the camp, but then it was like, it's fine. No, it's just not there for that. So anyways, that is everything I watched and read in March. Let me know your favorites from the past month in the comments down below. I'd love to dissect them with you. Thank you so much for listening to me rave about movies and television. I love it. And if you want to hear more of it, you can subscribe to this channel. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Have an absolutely amazing day or night, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, y'all.